right, chapter 11 then. So this is more the nuts and bolts of the finance side. So the first thing they talk about there is interest rates and some of the things that affect the interest rates. And so the risk involved in the loan. So one of the reasons why your dollar loan centers and those types of places can charge more in interest or are justified in charging more in interest is the fact that those loans that they're making are kind of high-risk loans, aren't they? You know, it's not best clientele as far as credit scores are concerned or as far as income producing is concerned, and those things have an impact on your creditworthiness or the risk of making that loan. And so that's going to be more expensive. It's more expensive to lend money to a business than it is to lend money to an individual that's buying a home. That's because its chances of the business failing are considerably greater than somebody losing their job. So those types of things are going to affect that loan. The business outlook for the future. That's really been one of the big things to keep interest rates down recently, is because of the pessimistic view looking into the future. That's starting to improve, and as that continues to improve, I think you're going to see interest rates start to keep pace with that sentiment. They're going to see that there's other places you can put your money for that return, and interest rates are going to try to keep pace with that rate of return. And that kind of fits right into number 3 with alternative investments. Anybody take economics in college? How much fun was that? You can probably tell that was one of my favorite classes in college. And so you had all these inverse relationships. And you had this thing that went on with unemployment and inflation and interest rates. And so it is interesting to see how all those things tied together. Some of those rules have kind of gone out the window the last few years, but typically, or historically I should say, it's pretty interesting to see some of that correlation that goes on. So you might get some just general questions on interest rates. Hopefully these are softball questions for you, because there are some certainty there, but it's not like this is rocket science. And so just think of it, if I'm making this loan, why would I charge higher interest to this person? And that probably will get you to that right answer. Now, unfortunately, this chapter is a lot of terms and definitions. And so there isn't a good project I can give you or anything like that. We just have to plow through it. And like a lot of things you've come across in this class, we can't just have one name for something. We have to have multiple, so we can confuse you easier on the test. Okay? So our first term is going to be that way, a term loan. Also called a straight loan. So whether you want to refer to it as term or straight, your definition is going to be the same. These are usually short-term loans. So you're looking 1 to 5 years. And you'll either have interest-only payments or no payments. And at the end, you'll have to pay it all off in one big balloon payment. Okay, so a balloon payment refers to that large payment that's due at the end. What type of loans do we deal with in real estate that would fit into a term loan? Yeah, sellers usually don't want to carry it forever, so they'll put in let you get some equity and ownership in the place, then they want to be refied out of it. And so they could have a balloon payment. What's another situation where we run across a term loan and what we do commonly? Flipping a house, you could if you had a line of credit that you bought it on. That could be a situation where that comes into play. Construction loan is probably the primary loan. And so you see a buyer comes in and gets a construction loan. How long do those last? Yep. 6 to 12. I mean, you're probably getting in trouble if it takes longer than 12 months. There are few exceptions to that, but your typical house, your lender's going to want some type of permanent financing in place. And so do you have any payments during the construction loan? You can have interest. Sometimes they just wait for that at the end. And so it can go either way depending on lender preference. And so that would be the one probably true term loan that we see commonly in real estate. The others fit into an amortized mortgage. And so your seller financing would probably be partially what they would refer to as a partially amortized loan. So it's amortized over 20 years, but has a balloon in 5. Your commercial loans fit into that category, where they'll amortize them over 20 years, but have that balloon that's due in 5. So you either have to refinance or you have to pay it off. Our traditional mortgage, though, is now a 30-year mortgage, and it's fully amortized. And that means that you have equal payments each and every month for the life of the loan. And so when you start off at the beginning of the loan, you're making greater interest payments than principal. But by the time you get to the end of the loan, you're paying primarily principal and very little interest. But the payment has stayed the same throughout that whole period. So here's one of those things that you probably will have to do on the test. I would almost guarantee you get one question like this. And that's at the top of page 203. And they want to know how much your principal has been reduced after 1 month or 2 months payments. Okay? So they will tell you a couple of things in order for you to calculate this. Interest rate, principal. Okay, so now you have 2 out of the 3 of our ERB formula. And then they also have to tell you what the mortgage payment is, that principal and interest. Because you have to isolate that, be able to take that interest out of that payment in order to figure out how much the mortgage has been reduced. So let's just step through what's in the book real quick. $90,000 at a 7% interest rate gives you annual interest of $6,300. Okay? Simple enough to follow. We're looking for monthly interest. So we divide $63,000 by 12 months, and that gives us $525 per month in interest. Your $599.40 is the total payment, your principal and interest payment on this mortgage. Of that $599.40, $525 of that is interest. So you subtract the $525 from the $599.40, and that gives you $74.40. That much is allocated to principal. So that is how much you'll pay down that debt that month. And so you start with your principal balance of $90,000, subtract the $74.40 to get a new principal balance of $89,925.60. And so if they would ask you to go to 2 months, then you just repeat that process. But in the second step, instead of starting with $90,000, you would start with your new principal, the $89,925.60. All right, the next paragraph puts in the acronym there of PITI. this direction. So we have principal, interest, what's the T? Taxes, and insurance. This is also what they refer to as a budget mortgage later on. Who likes to have their mortgage payment set up this way? Everything's taken care of. Okay? There's a couple. That's all right. I absolutely hate this. It drives me crazy to see my money sitting out at some other bank's place all year long. Sometimes lenders require it. They typically are going to require it, first-time home buyers, that type of thing. They encourage it because they get to use your money over the year. But you don't have to do that. But you do have to be able to pay your taxes and insurance bills when they come up. The nice thing about this is you don't have to worry about it. You make your monthly payment, the bank takes care of those things. But whenever you see on the test, the PITI, this is what they're talking about: principal, interest, tax, insurance. And it also could be referred to as that budget mortgage. So on top of page 204 is this chart. Okay, this used to be on the back of realtors' business cards. You used to see realtors have this taped to their desk. They would have this little cheat sheet here to figure out monthly payments. Okay, so going down the left-hand column is the years. How long are you going to amortize it? Going across the top from left to right is the interest rate. Okay, so let's look at a 15-year loan at 9% interest rate. What number does that give us? Okay, 10.15. Okay, this is your payment per thousand of your loan amount. Okay, so if you had a $200,000 loan, you would take this times 200. And so this would give us what, 20, 30 per month? Now what they'll do to you on the test, so you kind of understand how to use that chart. What they'll do to you on the test is something like this. You have a $150,000 loan, and you have a mortgage factor of 8.73. You have $1,200 in taxes per year. Obviously, you don't live in Lincoln County. And you have $600 in insurance per year. And then what is your PITI? Let's step through the first part together. Maybe this will get some of us going. We have to figure out the principal and interest payment. So we take our loan amount times our factor, right? But our factor is per thousand of the loan. So we have to scratch out 1,000. So we'll take our 150 times 8.73, and that gives us what? 1309. How many cents? 50. Okay, so that's our principal and interest per month. Now we have to figure out what is our taxes and insurance per month. $100 per month? And $50 per month? So if we add 150 to this, which is our TI, when they do the budget mortgage, they either already give you this or they'll give you the mortgage factor to start with. Okay? Because you're technically not supposed to be that complicated in your math to have to amortize payments and that type of thing. And so they have to give that to you. And really probably the trickiest part here is if they give you quarterly or half a year's worth, you know, that type of thing. It's just making sure you get it to the right level. Okay, so below that chart they talk about the partially amortized mortgages. We discussed that a little bit earlier too. And so you might have a loan that's amortized over 20 or 30 years, but it has a balloon payment after year 5. That fits into that partially amortized. So any amortized loan with a balloon payment is a partially amortized loan. An amortized loan that pays off to 0 with the same payments all the way through is going to be a fully amortized loan. You can get them. I mean, you can. It's not normal, but you typically your interest rates are even a little bit cheaper with that. And so what they end up kind of fitting into is an ARM loan. And so you would have like a 5-1 ARM where you would have an interest rate that's fixed for 5 years, and then it either becomes adjustable or you pay it off. And so, but it would be fully amortized over that first 5 years. So you have interest only and option ARMs. Now this is kind of like the red-headed stepchild of the financial debacle. Mm-hmm. And so these are also called pick-a-payment loans. Anybody have a pick-a-payment loan? And so you had this, I can't remember the name of them. There was Golden something or other because they came out of the San Francisco area. They invented these pick-a-payment loans to where you had the choice. You can make interest-only payment, minimum payment, a 30-year amortized payment, or a 15-year amortized payment. Your choice every month. Just pick what you want to pay. And so, but they were all adjustable rate mortgages too. And so these people were tearing it up. And Wachovia came in and bought them because they were doing such a great job. And then Wells Fargo came in and bought Wachovia because all of a sudden those pick-a-payment loans weren't doing so well. And Wachovia went from, you know, a national power to defunct, all because of the purchase primarily of that one company out in San Francisco. And so I still have one of their loans on a rental property of mine. My interest rate's 4% right now. I could probably get a little bit less, but every month I can decide, do I want to pay a little bit more down, or they took away my interest only option. So I can't just pay interest on it, but I have a minimum payment, a 30-year payment, or a 15-year payment still. So it works wonderful as long as you make your payments. And when you're in an environment like this where your interest can go anywhere but down. And so, you know, it's going to start going back up, and I'll probably have to refinance, but right now it just doesn't make too much sense. And so they used to have these products out there. I don't think you could find an interest-only loan on a house for a long period of time right now. Yeah. And so HELOCs are about the only thing. And it would, they used to do HELOCs for 125% of the value of your house. Now they won't even get to 100% of the value of your house. And so a lot of that stuff has changed. And this is one of the things that, for now at least, have gone by the wayside. We've already talked about budget mortgage. Equity is that difference between your value minus your loan. So that difference is referred to as equity. That's what we'd all love to have. Any questions on equity? Pretty straightforward. Easy enough to calculate. That could easily be a math question on the test. Usury. We don't have usury laws in South Dakota. When Citibank was looking at setting up their headquarters here, there was a special session of our legislature, and over a weekend period, they did away with South Dakota usury laws, kind of paved the road for Citibank to come in and open up shop. And usury is a cap. Usury, another word for it, would be unconscionable. And so it used to be illegal, and it still is in a number of states, to charge an interest rate that would be considered unconscionable. And so South Dakota, you could charge whatever you want. The market determines that. And so there's no state law that would limit it. But some states still have their usury laws in place, and you wouldn't be able to charge over X. So they limit that for us. Ready for the question of the hour? One percent, or one discount point, is what percent of the purchase price? Why not? Very good. Yeah, sure. You guys are getting close to where you take advantage of being able to miss 10%, right? Okay, so discount points are discussed at the bottom of page 206. Again, we've already talked about this. The main thing that you're going to need to know for the test is how to calculate a discount point. So 1 point is 1%, 3 points is 3% of the loan amount, okay? Now, in theory, what a discount point does is buys down the interest rate over the life of a loan. And so if the market rate is 5.25%, and you want a loan for 5%, in order to buy that down, you typically would have to pay 2 discount points. Okay? In order to be able to buy down that interest rate. So that interest rate then would be 5% over the 15 or 30-year life of your mortgage. If you don't pay those discount points, it's going to be 5.25% over that time. I would say historically, 1 discount point is 1/8 of a percent. Okay, 0.125. It's not. It's going to vary from lender to lender, but that's kind of just a general rule of thumb. And so it's not. You don't pay 1 discount point and get 1% off your interest. That doesn't work unless you're in a 1-year ARM, and then you could probably do that. Is 0.125, which would be 1/8 of a percent, but 0.125%. And so right now, I'm sure there's some good loan officers out there that talk people into paying discount points today. But, you know, it doesn't, if you look at historic trends, most of your mortgages, the life of the mortgage is only about 7 years. And typically, in that example there, you would spend less money paying that extra 0.25% interest over 7 years than you would in the 2% that you use to buy down that interest rate. But there's a lot of folks that can't calculate those percentages very fast and don't necessarily equate dollar for dollar what saves what. And so it's kind of easy for loan officers to talk folks into paying discount points, but rarely are they worth it. They talk about origination fee down at the very bottom. Say, don't confuse it with origination fee. They accomplish two different things. So origination fee is what a loan officer is going to charge in order to put the loan together. A discount fee is what is paid to pay down that interest rate over the life of the loan. So they accomplish two completely different things, but they're going to be calculated the same way on the test. If you have a 1% origination fee, it's just like having one discount point. If you have 2.5% origination fee, be the same as 2.5 discount points. You're going to calculate it exactly the same way. Loan to value ratio, everybody okay with that? Loan divided by value of the property. Anybody notice the similarity? Oh, that shouldn't be a T, that should be a B. Does it look like something else? Pretty close to Irv, isn't it? So anytime you're dealing with percentages, you can use this T formula. Okay? What I like to call this is a little number, big number. So we know the rate's always going to be at the bottom. The little number is always going to be on top, and the big number is always going to be on bottom. So whenever you have a percentage rate question, you can use the little big number formula. It works for IRB, it works for IRP, it works for loan to value. Whenever you have a percentage comes in, you can just plug it into that little number, big number formula. Promissory note. Here's a good little saying for you guys to remember. You can have a note without a mortgage, but you can never have a mortgage without a note. Okay? You can have a promissory note without the mortgage, but you can never have a mortgage without the promissory note. So your promissory note is evidence of the debt. It is your obligation to pay something back. It's going to set out the terms of the debt. How much is it? What's the interest rate? What's the payment schedule? When is it a late payment? What happens when it's a late payment? When am I in default? What happens when I'm in default? All of this stuff is spelled out in that promissory note. So they talk about elements of the note down at the bottom of that page. Don't worry about all that stuff. It's a contract, right? What do you need in order to have a valid contract? It could be verbal, could be in writing. Okay. You have to have offer, acceptance, okay, that meeting of the minds. Doesn't necessarily. It's always good to get it in writing, but it doesn't have to be in writing. So offer acceptance. What's the thing of value that's exchanged from one party to consideration? So we're getting close. We have offer, acceptance, consideration. I better write these up. Get them back in your mind. You know you have a test coming up, right? Offer, acceptance, consideration. Has to be legal purpose. Yeah. How about the parties? What do the parties have to be? Capacity or competent parties. So there has to be capacity. Now, if this is for the sale of real estate, Kelsey, it has to be what? In writing. Very good. That's because of the statute of frauds, right? You know your promissory note basically has to meet these same things. And so it has to have that meeting of the minds between the parties. The consideration is going to be the loan and the repayment terms. It's got to be for a legal purpose. And so the rest of this is common sense, Ken. It's a promissory note. So you're going to have loan amount in there. You're going to have interest rate. You're going to have repayment terms. All that kind of stuff we should be able to get figured out. So I wouldn't spend too much time trying to memorize that list or anything like that. Remember, it's a promise to pay a debt. And remember that saying that you can have a note without a mortgage, but you cannot have a mortgage without a note. Because the mortgage, over on page 210, is going to be the collateral for the debt. And so you have a house here, you have a note here. How do you bind this house? And that is with a mortgage. So that mortgage allows the lender, upon default of the note, to foreclose on the house. You know, there are people all around this country that lost their house during the recession, and they still haven't had to move out of them because the lenders can't come up with a note. And so that mortgage that they have is no good without the note, right? You can have a note without a mortgage, but you can't have a mortgage without a note. So they can't find this. How come? So now this is, I'm letting you guys into a vision in my head, okay? So be kind. So before all of this stuff happened, when I sit through a class like this, I'm thinking, okay, there's Fannie Mae. They're buying billions of dollars of mortgages, notes and mortgages across the country. What are they doing with these notes and mortgages? And so I fall back to Raiders of the Lost Ark when they're taking it in at the very end to store it, and you just got this huge warehouse, just rows upon rows of boxes. Someplace in this world, there's just huge, huge buildings full of paper that we signed at closings. And all of a sudden you start having them foreclosed, and somebody's walking in there. Okay, I need 445 North Day. Where do you suppose that one's at?
Isn't it all?
I don't know if that makes it any better. No, it wasn't though. They've started to change that over to where everything has to be transferred electronically.
So how long does that process take? Can you live it for 5 years for free?
Well, it depends on statute of limitations. And so our statute of limitations in South Dakota on a real estate contract is going to be 10 years. And so if they can't produce this note within 10 years of the default, then they can file a quiet title action and have that mortgage erased, and the house is theirs. Well, they try to, but there's nothing they can do because they don't have the right to. There's no note.
How does the homeowner know that they don't have notes?
When you get the foreclosure notice, you ask you ask the lender to provide you with a copy of the note. I would agree, a lot of people are kind of, I'd say fortunately for this country, most people are innocent, right? And honest people. So they know that they've defaulted on their mortgage when they get that notice. It's a bad time in their life, but they're going to pack up their stuff and leave because they know that that's what they're supposed to do. But no, even if you get foreclosed on, you have a redemption period. South Dakota, it's 180 days, and that's to give you time to get up on your feet. You don't have to make any of those payments during that 180-day period. And so you can save up that money so you can move into an apartment, find some other option for you at the end of that. And so some states are even longer than that. Some are out there a year. So, but a note and mortgage, from the mortgage standpoint, has to go together, because the mortgage just attaches the note to the real estate. It is what creates that collateral. What they call this in legal terms is hypothecation. And so you'll probably see this on the test, that term. Now, a good part of taking this test, there's only 100 questions, so you're not going to see everything we talked about as a right answer, but I guarantee you'll see them on there as a wrong answer. Yeah. And so to be able to eliminate those helps out just as much as knowing the right answer sometimes. Okay? So one thing you have to fight is human nature. Oh, I've never seen this word before. That must be the right answer. No. How many hours have you just spent preparing for this test? Do you think you haven't seen a word before? That should be a red flag that that's absolutely the wrong answer. And so fight that urge to pick that. But you will have that. Now, another thing we need to get straight dealing with mortgages. If you go to the bank, are you the mortgagor or the mortgagee? Which one is it? You're the mortgagor? You're certain of this? You're absolutely right. The way that I keep this in my head is the mortgagor is poor. Okay? And so I can relate that. And the mortgagee is greedy. I can tie that to banks pretty easy. So that helps me keep track of who is who. But remember, when you talked about contracts, the ors always give the document, right? And the e's always receive the document. So in this case, the document is the mortgage. And so you go to the bank and you give them a mortgage on the house. Okay, there's kind of a common saying that creates a little confusion here. I'm going to the bank to get a mortgage? No. You're going to the bank to get money. When you're at the bank, you'll give a mortgage to them in exchange for that money. Mortgagor is the only one that I want you to assimilate with you. The rest of them, it all depends on if you're buying or selling, where you're going to fit in. Grantor is the owner selling to the grantee. But still, the grantor gives the deed, the legal document. The grantee receives the legal document. You have vendor, vendee, and contract for deed. So the vendor is another name for seller. Vendee is the name for the buyer. So it's easier to probably, as a general rule, to keep track of the ors and the e's. The ors give, the e's receive. So when we go to the bank, we sign a promissory note and we sign a mortgage. So the note obligates us to pay the bank back money. The mortgage gives the bank an equitable interest in our property in case we default. They have a way to get made whole again. They could foreclose on our loan. Now, you tie these two things together, or just a note by itself, and it's referred to as a negotiable instrument. I can spell it. so this is kind of a legal term. It's not found in your book, but this helps you understand some of this a little bit. Another thing that we commonly use in life that's a negotiable instrument is a check. At least we used to use checks. And so when you write a check, if I would give Dwight a $100 check, he can endorse it and pass it down to Kelsey, and Kelsey could go to the bank and get $100. Okay, so that is a negotiable instrument. It can move from one party to another. And Kelsey could pay Dwight $100 to get the $100 check, or $90 to get the $100 check. And so you can sell that around, and whoever holds it is the one that gets the value for it. A note is exactly the same way, and that is why the whole secondary market thing works. And so when I was full-time practicing law and I would do a contract for deed, if a seller didn't want to hold that contract forever, there are companies around that we could sell the contract to. We could give them a call up and say, hey, we got a contract, these are the terms, how much would you pay us for it? And if we came to an agreement, we would just sign the contract over to them. And that's what happens on the secondary market. Fannie Mae, your local bank, is just signing that note and mortgage over to Fannie Mae. Now Fannie Mae holds that. They're the ones that have that negotiable instrument. And a lot of times they're going to be sold 2 or 3 times. Okay, so now to get back to some of the other things that are in the book and definitely will be on the test. One is a defeasance clause. I don't know about you, but defeasance sounds a little bit like defeated to me, right? And it kind of goes together. They have the same base word. And so this means once we have our mortgage paid off, the lender is going to come in and satisfy it. They're going to remove that lien from our property. The next clause that comes up is the alienation clause over at the bottom of page 212. So we have Bob here that signs a note and mortgage with ABC Bank. Then Bob sells his house to Fred over here and gives Fred the deed. Now, is Fred on the note? No. But Fred lives in the house, right? So now ABC Bank is in this situation where somebody who's not obligated to them in any way is now living in their house. And so what happened when Bob did this is that they alienated the house from ABC Bank. Okay, there's not that direct relationship anymore. And so another term for that alienation clause is referred to as due on sale. Okay, so when Bob sold this house to Fred, it triggered the alienation clause or the due on sale clause in that note and mortgage, which means that Bob has to pay that off in full in order to sell that property. But I could lose the house if Bob quits making payments on it because they have they're secured with that mortgage. And so because the mortgage is public record, I should have had notice when I bought the house. And so I can't claim I didn't know anything because it was filed. And so they would be able to take the house from me. So that would mean that I would have to sue Bob also. So it's not a very good position for me to be in, but it also complicates the bank's life. And so that's why they put those due on sale clauses in there. Now, another thing that happens that makes the bank's life easier is the acceleration clause. So let's say that I have a $1,000 a month mortgage payment. And it's due on the 5th. What is today's date? 12th. I haven't made this payment yet. So I'm late. And so the bank starts a foreclosure action against me. And so up until the time of the foreclosure sale, if I want to redeem the property, all I have to do is catch up on what I owe the bank. And so they give me notice of the sale's coming up next month. So I write them a check for $1,000, and they have to stop because I just redeemed the property. You know, there might be a few fees on top of it, that type of thing. But I've stopped their foreclosure action. So next month comes along. I do the exact same thing. I don't pay. They start a foreclosure action. I write them another $1,000 check, and they have to stop. And I do it next month, and the next month. It gets to be an irritation for the lender a little bit, right? It's too easy almost for me to catch up. And so they have put into these notes and mortgages an acceleration clause. So now I've missed this payment. They could say, we could care less about your $1,000 a month. We want our whole $250,000, or we're going to sell this at a foreclosure sale. They can call the whole note due and payable now. They can accelerate it to today and force you to pay the whole thing off if you're going to redeem the property. And it's just a matter of efficiency. It doesn't make any sense that you have to keep going back and starting this process over again. And so this allows them to accelerate it and get it done at one time. If you're always making your payments, you never have to worry about it.
No.
And so I would say it all depends on lender practice, but I would say that 30 days late, you're getting a notice. Most lenders aren't going to do much of anything dramatic until you're probably 3 months late. And at that point, you better start coming up with payment plans and things like that to get caught up, or it's going to turn around. Now, I've heard of situations where lenders have let people go a year plus, but that's just kind of crazy. There's no way to save it then. And so I think if you're a responsible lender, you are helping people stay on task and keep that paid. But those numbers are more important to some institutions than others. And so, I mean, there's a huge difference in how they go about collecting the loan. It's much easier, you know, and you could kind of think of the whole landlord-tenant thing this way. I don't think a good property manager lets a tenant get 30 days behind. Because if you're 5 days behind, it's much easier to catch up than 30 days behind. And 30 days behind, it's much easier for that person to catch up than if they're 3 months behind. You know, once somebody's 3 months behind, it's pretty much a done deal. You know, so I would say your more reputable lenders are going to be calling up, you know, sending notices, you're a month behind, you know, what's going on. A lot of them have programs in place if you've lost your job that they'll freeze your payments for 6 months, that type of thing. It's just a matter of giving them a call and seeing what's going on. But there's some that really don't care. You know, they'll get around to foreclosing on it once they have a chance. They do have to ask for payment in full, but that could be a letter 6 months from now that says you need to pay this within 15 days or we're going to start an action. So it varies quite a bit. Now, another clause that you see there that'll pop up, and they will ask test questions about each of these, is an assumption of a mortgage clause. And so I guess in between here and there, there's an assignments of rents clause on page 213. So if there's any rent being generated on the property, they could send notice to the tenants and say, please start paying the rent to us. And then they have to start applying that to the loan proceeds. First to the interest and then to principal once they get to that point. Okay, so that was a note and mortgage. The next thing that comes up is a deed of trust. But before we get too far into that deed of trust, let's flip back to page 228 and 229. Take this a little bit out of order. So what we just talked about was this whole note and mortgage, right? And so in this situation, the bank has equitable interest through this lien. And the borrower has legal interest. In a deed of trust date, we're going to switch this around where the borrower is going to deed the property to the bank. And that'll be that deed of trust. So now the bank ends up with the legal interest, and the borrower has the equitable interest. So basically, the bank ends up with title to the property here, and they end up with a lien to the property here. And so we come up with these theories. The title theory is going to be a state that uses deeds of trust. A lien theory state is going to be a state that uses mortgages. Okay, so the theories are named after what type of interest the lender has in those states. And then there's some states that are called intermediate theory, and they really could care less how real estate transactions are financed. They look at both of them as accomplishing the same thing, and so they will allow both. So a deed of trust, the actual document that they give us an example of back on, is it 215, 214, 16, 17, 18, that whole area. That is really a deed and a mortgage and note put together, or a deed and a promissory note put together. And so in the old days, it probably mattered a little bit to lenders what they got. You know, it had to be you had to allow for it in state law. South Dakota allows for mortgages. We've never taken deeds of trust. So that's the starting point. But if a lender had the choice, like in an intermediate theory state, they probably would prefer a deed of trust in the old days because the property's already been deeded in their name. And so if Ken wasn't making payments to me, I'd just go and kick Ken off. Have him removed. The property's in my name, it's mine. That's referred to as strict foreclosure. I don't have to go through any judicial process. I don't have to worry about Ken's rights. I've already have it taken care of. But now most every state has put in some type of kind of debtor's bill of rights type of thing to where they protect your interest in your real estate. And so somebody can't just take that away from you on strict foreclosure anymore. They have to go through a foreclosure process and give you that right of redemption. They have to give you the ability to get caught up again. Yeah, contract for deed still allows you to do that. But a bank wouldn't be able to sell on a contract like that and be able to do that. That's just between private parties. Okay, some other clauses we need to look at as far as mortgages are concerned. They are over on page 218. And that's the subordination clause. So you've already talked about order of priority and the requirements of filing and all of that kind of stuff. So the first mortgagee to file their mortgage at the courthouse is going to be in first position. Now, typically at a foreclosure sale, there isn't enough money to even cover the first lien holder. And so if you're a second lien holder, you're out of luck. And so if you're a first lien holder, you want to maintain that position. You don't want to be subordinate to anybody. And the subordination clause deals with that. You could see it in a couple different ways. You can see it in a way that the borrower is agreeing that you'll always be in first position. And sometimes you'll see that in a second mortgage where the second mortgagee is saying, I agree to be in a subordinate position. And so they can go either way, but it's dealing with that order of priority. Prepayment penalty clauses. Some loans have this. We already talked about the first-time home buyers. That recapture thing is kind of a prepayment penalty clause because you're getting this benefit of 100% financing at below market rates. If you're going to pay us off early, we want to recapture some of that. Most loans these days don't have a prepayment penalty clause in there. Only ones that might or some type of ARM loan. There's the assumption clause. So most of your notes and mortgages are going to be considered non-assumable. Okay, the banks just don't want to deal with it. If somebody's going to come and buy the property, they want to be paid off, and you just start the whole thing over again. But a couple of the loans can be assumable. And so VA and FHA are the two assumable ones that we talked about. Now, if you assume a mortgage, your deed has to have a subject to clause in it. So do we remember the elements of a deed? Here we go again. What do we have? Competent parties, legal description of the property. What's that funny sounding clause? Addendum clause. The to have and to hold clause. Is that chapter 5? States' interest, deeds, and titles. Page 73, 74, the list is on 75. Competent parties, consideration, words of conveyance, description, legal description, restrictions, if any, the addendum clause, and then signatures. And so the subject to fits into that restriction category. So if I would deed Blackacre to Aaron, and Aaron is assuming the mortgage that's on there, my deed would say from Fred to Aaron for Blackacre, subject to this existing mortgage, whatever it is. And so that would make Aaron, when she accepted this deed, it would make her secondarily liable on that mortgage, no mortgage. I would be primarily liable because my name is on there. She would be secondarily liable because she agreed to take the property subject to that note and mortgage. Now, as far as the bank is concerned, they could care less. They want their money paid, whether it's for me or whether it's from Aaron or whether it's from both of us. They could care less. But it makes a little bit of difference to Aaron because she's only secondarily liable. I'm primarily liable. And so as far as she's concerned, I'm a little ahead of her in having to pay that. But that's about the only time it comes into play. But you will see the subject to clause on the test. It's kind of a nasty little trick that they play, but it's all dealing with assumptions. Okay, and the subject to is going to be found in the deed, not in the mortgage. The subject to is in the subject to clause is going to be found in the deed, not in the mortgage. But the assumption clause will be in the mortgage. Okay, open-end mortgage. This is going to be your line of credit. This is where you have a limit. It's kind of like a credit card. You have say you have a limit for $20,000, and so you can charge up to $20,000, pay it down to 10, would give you the ability to charge up to 20 again, and so you just have that limit in there. You could keep borrowing, paying off, borrowing, paying off. Whereas your first mortgage is going to be a closed mortgage. Okay, you have 30 years to pay it. If you pay a $10,000 chunk this month, you're not going to be able to get any of that $10,000 back next month. You can't access that equity. With an open-end mortgage, you can access the equity. So your typical example of open-end mortgage is a line of credit. Package mortgage. Over on page 219. This is going to include as collateral both real estate and personal property. Okay? So the SBA might do a package mortgage for a business where they'll give you a loan for the real estate and the equipment. And you'll sign a mortgage for the real estate, a security interest in the equipment, and that one note is going to take care of it. So that's a package mortgage. Not to be confused, but occasionally is, with blanket mortgages. Blanket mortgages cover multiple pieces of property. Okay, a lot of times you'll see property managers or investment owners that have blanket mortgages. Developers are a huge one that you'll see on the test as an example. They have a development with 50 lots, and the bank will require a mortgage on all the lots. Another thing that comes up with blanket mortgages on the test is a term called partial release. So in order to get one individual parcel out from under that mortgage, a lender would have to sign a partial release. And that's what they do in case of that developer. I have 50 lots for sale. When Tyler buys one, I have to pay the bank. The bank issues a partial release that allows me to give Tyler free and clear ownership to that lot that he just bought.
The developer gets clear cut of all the lots that they sell.
After he pays off the loan.
Pays the loan.
Yeah. And so, yeah. Developing's way more glamorous sounding than what it actually is. And so just unless you're also getting a commission for selling real estate or you're also making extra money building, you know, the margin in development even though it's, you know, it's big number-wise, it's kind of small margin-wise. You're probably looking in 10% range. And so, and that's paid out over however many years it takes to get that stuff paid off. So one that didn't make on our slide is at the bottom of oh, it did make it on there. Purchase money mortgage. The very bottom there. And so this is a type of seller financing. This is what would be used if the seller didn't want to use a contract for deed. They would go more the traditional route with the mortgage. And this actually makes a lot of sense because you can end up with some pretty bad title issues if you've sold something on contract for deed and you end up with the property back. Whereas if you do a purchase money mortgage, you are foreclosing through the state procedure, so you know when you get the property back that you're going to take care of all those title issues. It'll all be cleared up. It's probably a little more expensive on the back end if you have to foreclose, but it guarantees that title much better than what a contract for deed does. Because when you foreclose, you know, say that you have your first mortgage, say that there might be a second mortgage on it, and mechanics lien. You know, all these different types of liens that can attach here. If you foreclose here, you're foreclosing on that, all of these disappear. And so when you get the property back, you know that it's got clear title. Where contract for deed, you might have somebody that goes out and gets this mechanics lien that attaches. I've also seen contracts where they've somehow managed to get a second mortgage in place, and now I come in and take this property over, so I take it over subject to these things that the tenant's already created, and it becomes your responsibility or they take your property, so it can become kind of a mess. And that's probably where you see, traditionally you see that purchase money mortgage more is where the seller carries the second versus the first. So second mortgage and term mortgage are two good ones to end this hour on. So a second mortgage just means that it's not first in priority. It's somewhere else down the line. Might be third and fourth, but it's still going to be referred to as a second mortgage because it's not the senior loan. It can also be referred to as a junior mortgage. Typically, because these are riskier loans, they're going to have higher interest rates. And then a term mortgage. What did we say was another word we could use for term? Beginning of this chapter. Straight. Yeah. This is also could be a straight mortgage. And so this is short term, remember? 2 to 5 years, somewhere around in there with balloon payment at the end. Okay, so now we have this whole wraparound mortgage thing that absolutely doesn't occur anymore. You might see it on the test. If you do, it's probably a wrong answer. And so back in the old days, when you had your FHA loans that were rate capped, so 8%, market interest rates were 17%, but that FHA loan was only for 40% of the value, and you had to go and get another loan to be able to buy the place. How could you ever do that and not give up that 40% at 8%? And the way that you did it was with a wraparound mortgage. And so you ended up with two mortgages, one at a lower rate, one at a higher rate. And basically they end up kind of blending together. And so you get the benefit of that lower interest rate loan. I wouldn't waste too much time worrying or thinking about it. Why did they talk about the Great Depression in the book? And so history. So, you know the average age of a realtor right now, don't you? Not quite. 53. Yeah. And so if you got a realtor that's writing a book, it's a realtor with experience. So let's jump ahead to alternate mortgage plans. We've talked about the adjustable rate mortgage when we went over that FHA adjustable rate mortgage. So a couple of the key terms over on page 222. Index, margin, adjustment period, and cap. Cap rate. It should be rate cap, because cap rate gets confused with cap rate, which it is not. Haven't you guys learned about cap rate yet? Capitalization rate? So in the in the margin on 222 it says cap rate, and it really should say rate cap. And so what part of this is variable? Index. Very good. You guys just got a test question right. So the margin is fixed, the index is variable. The adjustment period is that period of time when your arm will adjust. Usually that's annual. Sometimes, like in a 5-1 arm, it would be after 5 years, and then it becomes annual. And then how much can it go up? And usually there's two caps, a adjustment period cap and a lifetime cap. That would be for FHA. But these arms, whatever, could be. You have to read the fine print to understand that. Remember when we talked about ECOA, and we said age is one of the protected classes there? We can't get into that information, or loan officers can't, unless it's for a reverse mortgage. And that's because the only people that can get a reverse mortgage is somebody that's 62 years of age or older. And so then that becomes relevant. And so a reverse mortgage, there's a couple of different ways to set this up. They've had a hard time through this whole financial debacle also. And so there's very few places that are doing these anymore. And they're all government regulated now. But you're able to use the equity in your house to buy an annuity, basically, that gives you a payment. And so when you die or that period is over, you either have to start paying that money back, or they get it out of the equity of the house when it sells. One key thing to keep in mind is your heirs are never obligated. So they never have to pay any of that money back. And so if it's on your house and you take it down to beyond nothing because you outlived what the bank thought you did, they get the house when you're done, but your kids don't have any obligation. All right, then you have your shared appreciation mortgage. Remember when we talked about insurance companies and their participation mortgage? This is kind of along the same vein. You see the steps that are in there. At some point in time, the property has to be sold, the loan paid off, or when a certain amount of time has passed, the lender not only gets their interest and principal paid, but they also get to share in a percentage of the appreciation on that property. You don't see those very often, but they are out there. Temporary buy downs. One example of a buy down is over on page 224, and that's the 3-2-1 buy down. Now, we talked about discount points buying down interest rate over the life of the loan. If you want to buy down the interest rate for just 1 year, it would just take one discount point, right, to buy it down 1% for 1 year. And so the 3-2-1 is kind of based off the fact that under FHA 203B, how much can the seller contribute to the buyer? 6%. Okay? So if we use that 6% to buy down the mortgage rather than to cover closing costs, we can buy down the mortgage 3% in year one. 2% in year two, and 1% in year three. And so then it goes back to whatever that full percentage was in year four and then on. Okay? Again, interest rate's so low right now, these things don't make all that much sense. But when you're looking at 10, 12% interest, that could be the difference between somebody qualifying or not qualifying for a loan. And so it can have a little bigger effect on it. And so that would be the 3-2-1 buy down, but it's just an example of a buy down in general. It would take 6 points to do that. Construction loans, we've talked about that being the term loan that you typically come across in real estate. It's going to be short term. The very most, residential wise, you hardly ever see them exceed a year. Commercial wise, you could see them out a little bit farther than that. But that's all kind of negotiable too. Home equity lines, we talked about that. Just getting a loan on the equity in your house. So let's look at some of these other terms that you might come across. These are miscellaneous ones over on page 225. If you get into commercial real estate, that type of stuff, estoppel certificates can be handy. So basically what a estoppel certificate does is draw a line in the sand. If you were buying a property and assuming a mortgage, you would draw a line in the sand with a estoppel certificate and say, this is the terms. This is how much is owed today. This is the rate. These are the payments going forward. So you know from this point forward what exactly you're getting into. And so somebody can't say, well, they forgot to make this payment 10 years ago. It doesn't matter because they've signed this estoppel certificate. They don't have the right to bring that up anymore. It's also good for commercial tenants and that type of thing. You can have the estoppel certificate signed before you take over the property. And you know the landlord doesn't owe them anything, that they actually are agreeing to the terms of this lease and all that type of stuff. So it's really good at kind of drawing a line in the sand and saying this is clearly what our understanding is from this point forward. I don't think you'll see it on the test though. Now satisfaction, you probably will. That's the second paragraph there. So that's the term of the piece of paper that is filed by the lender in order to remove the mortgage from your property. So once the mortgage or lien is paid off, the lender's going to file a satisfaction. Pledge is just additional collateral. A lot of times it's money. If a lender feels insecure, they can sometimes ask for you to put a chunk of money in escrow or in trust in an account at their place as a pledge to give them a little more security. So let's get into foreclosures and that. Does everybody understand the term short sale? Anybody not understand that? So a short sale is when you owe, typically is when you owe more on a house than what the house is worth. And so even when you sell it, you're not going to have enough money to pay the loans off on it. And so that is a traditional short sale. And so you need to have bank approval to take the lesser amount, or you're not going to be able to sell the house. They're really kind of difficult and time consuming to coordinate. Some people over the last few years have gotten really good at helping people with these. And so it's a definite niche out there. People do need help. They do need to have somebody with experience kind of navigate them through that. Buyers need people with experience on short sales to help them acquire some of these properties. But it's a tough situation, and it takes a lot of patience. And sometimes they just don't come together after spending hours and hours on that. Now, there are a number of different types. No, I shouldn't say a number of different types. There's really 3 different types of foreclosure. So you have your judicial, non-judicial, and strict. So judicial foreclosure is where you have court supervision through the whole process. And so it's kind of like suing somebody, where the lender has to file a complaint in court. They have to serve you with papers saying that they're bringing this action. You have a chance to answer. And all of this is ironed out in court. And when the court has heard the case, they will say either yes, you can foreclose, or no, you can't foreclose. And this is when the sale's going to happen. And so it's all done through court order, basically, and in court. And so this is kind of expensive, right? You can't afford your mortgage. How are you going to afford an attorney to represent you in court? And now your lender, they're just not going to find that $100 an hour attorney. They're probably going to have that $300-400 an hour attorney representing them. And when they win, all those bills get passed on to me. And so there's a few states that have this option. I would say most states have this option, but a lot of states also have a non-judicial foreclosure option. And in order to have a non-judicial foreclosure, you have to have a thing called power of sale clause. In your note and mortgage. And so this gives you the ability then to advertise the property for sale and conduct the foreclosure sale without court order, provided you followed certain guidelines. You provided notice, you put the notice in the paper for X amount of time, you've given everybody sufficient opportunity to redeem the property before the sale, all that kind of thing. And then you can sell it. It's still under court guidance per se, but it is not, you don't have to go to court prior to being able to do any of this stuff. And so it speeds up the efficiency of the process quite a bit, and it cuts down on the expense of this quite a bit. Now you notice in the margin there, that whole deed in lieu of foreclosure on page 228. And so a bank doesn't have to take this. A lot of times they will, but this is one option that a person has to avoid a foreclosure on your record. You already have a late payment, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, because you're being foreclosed on. But you avoid having a foreclosure on your record, which is the same as having a bankruptcy on your record, by giving the bank a deed to the property. And so you say, okay, I'm not going to be able to make it. This isn't working. How about I just deed the property back to you? And if you do this early enough, you'll be able to talk to somebody at the bank that can make this decision. But typically, once banks get to the point to where they're foreclosing on the property, there's nobody at the bank you can talk to. You can try going through their attorney, but usually it's not going to do much good at this point. And then you have at the bottom there that whole strict foreclosure option. where you just go and kick the person off the property and it's yours. That works for contract for deed, but there's not a single state that has strict foreclosure on the books anymore. So let's look at this timeline real quick. Okay, so this is kind of the timeline of a house that is going through foreclosure. The house is bought. At some point in the future, there's a default that isn't corrected that leads to a foreclosure sale. And then at some point after that foreclosure sale, the borrower has to vacate the property. Okay? So this period right here is referred to as equitable redemption. And right here is statutory redemption. So this period of time isn't set by anything. Okay, it depends on how long the bank waits from default to when they start the foreclosure proceedings, and then how they proceed from that point forward. And so it can vary considerably from a few months to a few years. But during that equitable redemption period, you have the ability to catch up and keep the property. Now, if they accelerate the loan, that might mean that you have to pay the loan off, refinance somehow in order to save the property. This period of time is set by statute, hence the name statutory redemption. In South Dakota, it's 180 days if the mortgage is written correctly. And so you are free as the borrower to stay in that house and live there for that 6-month time period. If they would vacate the property, a lender can cut this period short. They can petition the court, and the court will terminate the right of redemption when the property is vacated. But if they don't, it's going to be, at least here in South Dakota, 180 days. So there's 6 months. And in that time period, in order to redeem, you have to pay whatever was paid at the foreclosure sale. Whether it be more or less. You know, typically if nobody shows up to buy at a foreclosure sale, or if somebody shows up just to lowball at the foreclosure sale, the bank will just take the property back for what's owed on it. Now, some of your larger banks don't want the property at all. And so you get into areas like Detroit and stuff where they have blocks upon blocks of vacant houses because they've all been foreclosed on. If you would offer a bank $1 at the foreclosure sale, they'd probably take it in those situations. So any questions on that process, those time periods? That redemption's going to come up. You know, which redemption happens before or after the foreclosure sale. So you have to be able to place those in the right spot. Equitable is before, statutory is after. Okay, that works again. So back on to the textbook, we've already talked about title, lien, and intermediate theories. And so that gets us into some of these liens that wrap up our discussion today. And so a lien is just going to be a monetary claim against the property. Okay, there's a number of different ways for these liens to attach. They can be voluntary, which means that we agree to it. That would be like a mortgage, right? Okay, so we voluntarily sign the note and the mortgage that allows the bank to put the lien on our property. Or it can be an involuntary lien, like a mechanic's lien or a judgment lien against our property. Or a tax lien like they use there. Now, the very next paragraph, before we get to the next page, there are two other types of liens that should be highlighted there also, but they don't in the book. And that is a specific lien or a general lien. And so a specific lien attaches to one specific piece of property, whereas a general lien attaches to all the property in that jurisdiction. So a mortgage would be a specific lien. It attaches to the property that's legally described, whereas a judgment creates a lien against all the property that you would have in that county. And that would be a general lien. I guess they highlight these terms on the next two pages for us, 230 and 231. So they give some examples of specific liens. So mortgage is that specific property that you agreed to put it on. A tax lien would be the specific property the taxes are owed. Same with special assessments. Mechanics liens work the same way. It attaches to the property where the work was performed or the goods were delivered. General liens, you haven't paid your taxes, that could put a lien on any piece of property you own in the U.S. or U.S. territory. Judgment liens are going to be attached to any real estate that you have within that jurisdiction. And so if it's a county court, it would be anything within the county. Child support liens also happen that way. They can attach to your property wherever you have in the country if they're followed through with. So over on the next page towards the end of that section, they have a couple of things. What is a surety bail bond lien? If you don't pay this, they just take your house. They don't send the dog after you? Is that what they're saying? I think it is. Just most of the people that are bailing out someone, I would probably say, don't have the assets that would be subject to this type of thing. So you won't see the bail bonds liens all that much. A lot of times these are going to be unsecured debts. And so that's when they do send out bounty hunters and that type of thing. This is exactly what they do.
Yeah.
But if you have property, they'll take a lien on it. Yeah, some states give them automatic liens against that person's property.
Really?
Yeah. They talk about the waiver in there, lien waiver. And so kind of the common practice with these is when you're doing a new construction, it's nice to pay a title company a little premium to manage the loan funds, but then they also collect the lien waivers from the contractor. So as they pay a contractor, they get in exchange lien waivers. And so if you have the title company do that, they can write into the title insurance that everybody's been paid in full, and you don't have to worry about that hidden mechanics lien coming up after the fact. And so just a nice little feature on that. The other one that you will see on the text is the very last one they talk about in the chapter, and that's that les pendens. Just means pending legal action. Now don't confuse this with a lien, because it's not a lien. It's just a notice of a pending legal action. And so I just had this question come up from a client. They had a ranch out in the western part of the state. They sold the ranch on a contract for deed. The people paid on the contract for deed for 6 or 7 years, and then I think one of them died, something like that, and so it was a bad situation for them. But they weren't able to make the payments on the contract for deed. And it hit at a time where this guy's other investments were down, and so he couldn't make the mortgage payment either on it. So the property ends up going into foreclosure. And he has since kind of changed his financial picture around to where he has the ability to redeem it now in foreclosure. But the kids of the people who were buying the place on contract for deed have sued them for the equity that the parents had in the property. And so for some reason they think they're entitled to that equity that they've paid. And so there's a less pendants out there in that county because of this pending legal action against them. And he thought by going through the foreclosure that would be terminated, and if he redeemed it, then he would get the property free and clear. And that's not true, because the les pendens is just a notice of pending legal action that attaches to any property that you would have there. So as soon as he acquires that property again and the les pendens is still pending, it attaches once again to that property. There are some cases that when you tip the scale and you have more equity than you have debt, that you're not able to strictly foreclose on it. And so I don't know if that's where they're at in the whole thing, what's going on with it. But they apparently have enough to be able to file a complaint and get the les pendens there. Awesome. You guys have been a great class.